Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we go behind the scenes at BlueScope to meet the people who create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for listening. On the 3rd of November 2022, BlueScope is celebrating the 50th anniversary of its site at Western Port. Located on the Mornington Peninsula in the Australian state of Victoria, this is a facility that has seen great change over the years and has played a significant role in the local community that surrounds it. To mark this momentous occasion, we are pleased to share 3 consecutive podcast episodes about the history and people of Western Port. Each episode includes extended interviews with past and present employees as they share their career experiences and memories of the site. While there are naturally commonalities between these stories, each participant brings their own unique perspective. In this 3rd and final instalment for Western Port's anniversary, we're focusing on 5 women and their experiences at the site. They are Laura Towey, Regina Neville, Emily Trott, Uthpala Garusinghe, and Stacey Forecast. They each outline their career backgrounds, what led them to Western Port, and share their thoughts on the importance of the broader topic of diversity and inclusion at work. Remember that you can use the chapter function in your podcast app to jump between interviews and consult the links and show notes to learn more about mentioned topics. Let's cross to the first interview with Laura Towey, who on top of her own story provides detailed context about the challenges that Western Port has tackled over time and the great strides that have been made there in diversity and inclusion.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I'm currently the National Employee Relations and Experience Manager for BlueScope in Australia.
Thanks for joining the podcast, Laura. Can you start us off by giving us context about what that role is and what you're doing at the moment?
I actually oversee the 50 Australian properties from an employee relations perspective. So what I'm actually doing is providing advice and support to all of our businesses within BlueScope around their employee relations strategy and also about employee experience. And most specifically, it's about how to connect BlueScope with our frontline employees.
People might have heard the words employee experience flying around but not know what it means. Why is it so important?
It's incredibly important because it's basically your human-centred approach to how you deal with your people. And gone are the days where there's a real separation between work and life, like that whole notion of work-life balance is gone. It's all about actually managing human beings and helping human beings to get the best out of work and the best out of life in general. So employee experience is a fancy HR word for basically the experience that employees have at every key juncture of their employment relationship.
You, of course, have had your own employee experience or your own adventure through BlueScope. This wasn't your first position, and we're here to think about 50 years of Western Port, where people have come from. In this episode, particularly, the journeys of women in the organisation. So, as a woman at BlueScope, where did your journey start?
It's a really interesting story, actually, because I returned from the United Kingdom and I was 26 weeks pregnant. I'd been working over there for a former company, and I'd missed the whole Kevin 07 era, including the introduction of the Fair Work Act in Australia. And I thought to myself, wow, if I don't sort of get myself back into the HR space in Australia, I'm really going to struggle on the other side of my birth of my baby to be able to get back into work. Like, it could be a long time. And so I approached some agencies, and I was really lucky enough to pick up some work actually at BlueScope head office. And I worked for a guy called Barry Howard, who was the then Vice President of Remuneration. And I was covering for another person who was on parental leave at the time. And so I started in at head office just as an HR business partner role. Was supposed to be a 3-month contract, providing some coverage for her while she was off on a project. And the person who was doing the project was covering someone on mat leave. So that was my first start. And during that time, I was lucky enough to meet a lady by the name of Elise Latchford, now Elise Mans, and she was the then HR manager of Western Port. And she knew that I'd purchased a property out in the Mornington Peninsula, and she said to me, would you like to come out and have a look at the site? I said, I'd love to, that'd be great. And so I went out to the site and I got a tour by an HR business partner called Charlotte Flower, and she showed me all around the Western Port site, and it was completely new to me because I'd come from the hospitality and entertainment industry. So going into a big steel manufacturing site was quite eye-opening. I thought, wow, this is like a completely different business. This is just incredible and amazing. And Elise said to me, oh, would you consider doing some consulting work on our site? And I said to her, I would, but I pointed to my rather big belly at the time and said, I'm going to be otherwise engaged for a period of time. But yes, if something comes up out at Western Port, certainly it's close to home and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to help you if I can. And I then went off to have my baby. And then I got a phone call 4 months after I had my baby to say, we really need some help. And the then plant manager, Amy Allen, wanted to run what was called an engagement project on the site to really improve employee morale. So that's how I came to Western Port in the first instance, actually as a consultant to help work on employee morale for the site. And that was in 2011. Yeah, 2011, April 2011. I started on a project as a consultant, working back shifts, doing focus groups with employees to understand the level of employee engagement on the site.
When you started the job, what did you learn particularly about working at Western Port, having come from a different background, returning to Australia? What was the key element that you learned?
The key element for me is that I thought it would have completely different problems from other industries that I'd worked in. I thought it would take me a long time to work out, what were the root cause of their engagement issues. Because I'd never been in heavy industry before, I thought it would be a completely new set of issues. And so it surprised me to discover really at the core of things, most human beings have the same issues. Regardless of the industry, most employees, most people want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to feel a sense of achievement. They want to feel a sense of hope. They want to understand the future. And that is not just in our industry, that's in every industry. And it's not just in our country. Like in other countries I've worked, it's exactly the same thing. At the root of all people, they want to feel like what they do matters. And, that was an interesting insight, my biggest learning.
Now, you mentioned that you started in 2011. That's now just over a decade ago, which means that you were also around for the 40th anniversary of Western Port. Mm-hmm. 10 years is a decent chunk of time to be at a company. You learn a lot of different things, meet a lot of different people. What are some challenges that you've encountered along the way or changes that you've had to navigate?
It's been a decade of change. When I started in the business, as I say, I was working on an engagement project, and I remember saying to Amy and Elise, look, I've been reading all of the analyst reports in the paper, and it's looking to me like your company is about to undergo a really big restructure of some description, that you're in some sort of financial trouble. And, my advice to you as a sort of change expert is don't run an engagement project in the middle of a massive restructure. If something's coming, you're better to sort of stop and focus on that. And 8 weeks later, the closure of the hot strip mill had been announced, the mothballing of MCL5, the closure of the blast furnace in Port Kembla, and the complete restructure of the Australian and New Zealand businesses had been announced. It was, an incredible time. And I thought to myself, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do here because I'm on contract. And, ethically, I don't think it's absolutely the right time to be talking to people about the future when the future is so uncertain. And so the new plant manager that had commenced, a guy by the name of Bob Pauline, I went to see him with Elise and said, look, my advice is you actually need to stop this project. Not that I want to do myself out of a job, but you really need to stop this project. It's not the right time. And I'm happy to sort of park the work and come back to you at a later time because the work I've already started will help with the rebuild. But I don't think now's the time to continue. I said, alternatively, I'm happy to work the back shifts still and support your career transition centre because I think your employees are going to need additional help. And I was really fortunate because both Bob and Elise said that would be really great if you could come in and give people career coaching and, support and advice in addition to other people. Tony Aramo was running that. that would be really, really helpful because a lot of people left the business at the time. And it was very challenging personally, talking to a lot of people that had been at Western Port all of their lives and they'd never worked anywhere else, and they really weren't sure what they were going to do with the future. Like, what am I going to do? I live in a regional area of Victoria. I've been privileged to earn some really good dollars whilst I've been at Western Port. And now I'm looking at a future where things are really uncertain externally. I don't know how I'm going to get another job at the same level, and I'm probably going to have to travel to do it. And there were other people that were close to retirement and they were giddy with joy, but there was a real sort of spectrum of people and human beings at a really pivotal moment in their employment journey. So it was very challenging. I used to go home really exhausted and then get up in the morning and look after my baby all day and then do the back shift at night. But it was rewarding because I think it's a real privilege to be there at an employee's worst moment as it is in their best moment.
It's a matter of care, it sounds like you're saying, care for the people you're working with.
Oh, I really think it's the difference between an employee having a wonderful experience at work and them having a terrible experience at work. And I think even on their worst moment, like even when an employee is leaving the business, that can be handled in a way that you want that to be handled. And you would like someone in your family to experience it. It doesn't need to be additionally stressful. It's already stressful enough. So, and I distinctly remember a time in my life when my father was made redundant, and it was a company he'd worked for 27 years. And he was absolutely devastated by that experience. And then he and mum would go around delivering pamphlets into letterboxes to make money until he got another job. And that experience of seeing him like that and seeing my parents like that, to make ends meet, has always stayed with me. So, I thought if I'm ever in a position where I am in some way partially responsible for someone's experience when they leave a company, I'm going to make sure it's the absolute best experience that they can have, that I give them the absolute best advice and support I can give them. And I'd like to think I've stayed true to that.
Something that I really liked in your response just then in the story that you told was that you took the risk of saying, no, this is not the time for this particular engagement program. You took a risk in your role. Maybe it was something you shouldn't have done. But this is a broad question. I'm interested to know what you think of this. What do you think the value is of saying no at work sometimes? Saying something less popular or saying, no, we should do it this way, rather than automatically jumping to yes?
I think it's a really important question, and it's a really important thing to be able to say no, because what you really paid for, other than your skills, is what you think and your thoughts and your insights and your ability to challenge. And if we all say yes all of the time, then what we end up with is the status quo. And the minute you hit the status quo, you go backwards. And I really think, and I take it as a personal responsibility, and I always have, that it's as important when I say, no, that's not the right thing to do, as it is when I say, that's a great idea. And there's the whole continuum in between. I have learned over the years not to be as brash as to say flat no's, and I've certainly been given that feedback throughout my career that I can be too blunt in that way. So you've got to learn how to say no in a way that encourages an ongoing dialogue. That's something I've learned throughout my career. But I absolutely think it's important. We're not actually here to be popular. What we're here to do is the right thing for the right reasons. And sometimes doing the right thing for the right reasons, or saying the right no when it needs to be said, does actually make you uncomfortable and unpopular. But that's when you'll see real growth or real opportunity. And, early in my career, I had a consultant say to me, look, Laura, do you want to be right or do you want to be satisfied? And I said, well, I want to be right and satisfied, of course. And he said to me, but given the choice, what would you want to be? And really deeply thinking about that, the answer is always, I'd rather be satisfied. And so I'm quite happy to say no or to challenge, and also to be wrong, as long as the right outcomes are achieved. And I think that that's what we're here to do. And it's in those moments of discomfort, you see some real growth.
In what you just said there were some intriguing keywords like ongoing dialogue, thinking differently, and that makes me think of the ongoing dialogue about diversity and inclusion. And we're here talking to women or about women today. Obviously, diversity and inclusion, and I'm sure you'd appreciate this, goes beyond the binary of men and women. We're talking about different genders, orientations, ways of thinking, backgrounds. But given that women as a point of employment in heavy manufacturing or different industries has been such an issue to address, how do you think about being a woman in this industry, and what do you think are some of the important points that we're still addressing?
Oh, it's a great question. I suppose when I started at Western Port, there were 75 women in total out of, over 1,100. And those are some pretty startling statistics. And today at Western Port, you would have, about 180 women, and there are about 700 employees. So much better percentage and nearing, representation of the community, which I think is really good. But it's been a journey, it's been really, really interesting. So a couple of things when I started. One, I wasn't from heavy industry, and two, I was a woman. And also I was dealing with the challenging topics of employee engagement. And, I'd go to focus groups and I'd talk to predominantly white male, to be honest, of a certain age, groups of employees that had been around for a long time. Invariably, I found the very first question most of them would ask me is, what are your qualifications? Why are you here? And what are your qualifications? And to be honest, not even with a level of civility. I was quite shocked at the kind of hostility that I openly received. And, it was interesting. I used to reflect to myself, usually people at least meet me once before they don't like me. So that was, an interesting insight. I guess one of the things I would say about my journey in the last 10 years is I'm confident now, if I was to bring in a consultant on an engagement project and send them off to do focus groups on night shift, that is not the experience that they would have. That is absolutely not the experience they would have. And that's partly because of the work we've done culturally. And part of that cultural work is increasing our female numbers at Western Port. Just bringing in different ages, different ethnicities, different backgrounds and different sexes has really enriched the conversation at Western Port. It's really brought about positive challenge of many of the old ways of doing things. And that's not to say that the traditional ways of doing things weren't great, but if you're not going forward, you're going backwards. So we really needed to change it up in order to go forwards. And, what the women that we've injected into the plant over the last 10 years have brought is a different point of view and a different way of doing things and different perspectives from different industries, because a lot of those have come from, retail or hospitality or banking or, a vast variety. So we've been able to really tap into ideas and things we haven't formally been exposed to. And that's been wonderful. And a lot of the crews will tell you it's really enriched the social fabric of the community, not just at work. So Hastings is traditionally a poor socioeconomic area. So having lots of people in the Hastings community, 75% of all of them come from within 25 k's of the plant, has really lifted the whole community in a way that improves the schools, improves the shops, improves the small businesses, and gives a lot of hope to a lot of people for a great future. So I do think the diversity journey has been a really positive one, but a really challenging one at the same time. I remember going to a crew meeting when an employee said to me in front of 30 other people, "Oh, Laurie, you're not going to bring any more girls in, are you?" And I said, "Well, why would you say that?" And he said, "Because they're unsafe and they have lots of accidents." And I said, well, actually, the stats would show that we're actually far safer in any kind of vehicle, and that includes heavy vehicles. So I'm not sure what your objection is here. And certainly we've had no incidents of women involved in those kind of safety incidents that I'm aware of. But it was about having those dialogues and those conversations and respectfully being able to push back and say, well, what makes you so uncomfortable about the idea of working with a woman? Or someone younger, or someone who's originally born in India, or someone who's originally born in Asia. Like what's your level of discomfort about? Let's talk about that. What's the worst thing that could happen, and what's the best? And our people at Western Port, I think, the beautiful thing about Western Port, it is a collectivist culture. And so what's really unique about it is they do really embrace people that come in. And that means embracing people, warts and all of their experience, all of their prior histories, and they really take them as their own. It's like a family-owned business inside a large private employer, and that is incredibly unique, but amazing from a diversity perspective, because the inclusion piece is a lot easier to achieve in a collectivist culture.
You've hinted at this already in the sense that things have changed, and if you were to send a consultant on night shift, as you said, that they wouldn't have that same experience. What would you say to women or people from less traditional backgrounds who are thinking of entering this industry, Western Port as a site specifically? What should they be expecting, or what misconceptions can you push aside or reassure them about?
Well, I think for a start, people tend to have a view of heavy industry as being, big, cold, dirty, lifting, kind of really heavy manual handling type roles. That's the first thing. And, crusty old buggers standing around smoking and asking women, to flash certain parts of their bodies, because the 70s and the 80s were perpetuated by that kind of stuff. And, a lot of the movies you see with people in heavy industry, that's still how heavy industry is portrayed. So for a start, I'd say we are not the movies. You are more likely to see someone who looks very similar to yourself, that comes from a similar industry, has really never worked in a heavy industry environment at all. And you'll be well placed, because we have lots of manufacturing experts in our business. What we don't have are lots and lots of insights from other industries to help take us forward. And so it's a really nice blend. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, I would say, particularly if you're interested in shift work, it's very financially lucrative work. And for many, many years, that has been really only open to a certain portion of the population. And that is now genuinely open to all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds. So hang up your 3-hour commute each day into Melbourne CBD for your $80,000 job a year, where you're probably working 60 hours a week and feeling stressed, and seriously think about the balance you could get in our workplace, because a lot of our shift patterns allow for really genuinely good family time, good social time, and they pay very well. That's not to say shift work isn't hard. It is, and it's not for everybody. But there are also lots of different kinds of roles on the site. There's logistics people, and there's finance people, and there's HR people, and there's lots of engineers, different kinds of engineers, materials, mechanical, chemical. We have chemists on site. We have analysts. We have scheduling clerks. We have all kinds of roles. Depending on what your cup of tea is, what your background is, what you're interested in, BlueScope genuinely is a great place to consider employment, because we have great terms and conditions. We're a really safe organisation. Safety is a number one priority. So you've got nothing to fear from that perspective other than fear itself. And we need you. We need you. We want you. We welcome you. And there's lots of upside. I guess on the downside, I would say, like any new company or new environment, there's going to be a deficit in your technical knowledge, right? You're not going to know how to operate a crane or how to drive a forklift or how to do some of the production tasks, and that'll take time. But we will support you in learning that. We'll give you all of the training and all of the skills, and we'll never ask you to do anything that we don't genuinely feel is safe and good for you to do. I will also say you're going to come across a full spectrum of everyone you would come across in a community. So you're going to come across people that aren't thrilled that you're there, right through to people that have been waiting for you their entire lives. Like anything, it's an adjustment. You've got to make those adjustments. You've got to establish rapport. You've got to find your place, and just give it time, because most people who do 12 months at BlueScope will do 10 years as a minimum. It's just one of those really special organisations where you start and you think, like I thought to myself, I'll be here. If I can stay here until my child starts primary school, then I'll move on. And that child is starting high school next year. And my second child, which I also had during my time at Western Port, is in grade 1. And I've never been bored and I've never regretted a second of it. And I've never wished to go somewhere else. It's a really special kind of place to work. So there's hard days, but by and large, the great days far outweigh any of the hard ones. Back yourself and give us a chance. You'll love it. You won't regret it.
I think you've sent a very clear message, and I don't think anyone could step back from what you've said and say she's not passionate and serious and realistic about what she does. So that's great. To bring this conversation to a close, which I've really enjoyed, you've covered a lot. Reflecting on the fact that it's 50 years of Western Port, what's a key memory or point of difference or something about Western Port that you'd like to reflect on in this interview?
It's a hard question, but I will say, in the early years of my time at Western Port, sort of 2011 right through to 2015, it was a really tough time and it was really touch and go. I spent the bulk of my time trying to find ways to save money and save jobs. It's really hard yakka, like going to work every day, contemplating the person sitting next to you and whether they're going to have a job in 6 months, and all those people out there who've got families. It was really hard. It took a lot of really good leadership, really strong leadership from Bob Pauline and the Western Port lead team at that time to really pull us through. But we never underestimated the power of all of our people to really contribute to that. And they did. They really pulled up their socks and rolled up their sleeves, and we all just got in to make it happen. And so to be able to celebrate 50 years where now under Mike Hussey, who's a wonderful leader as well, we've recommissioned MCL5, which we'd closed in 2011. We've got a new Western Port Customer Service Centre where the hot strip mill used to be. We've got masses of capital investment going into the plant. Like, it's actually a beautiful thing to be able to say, I have left Western Port to take on my new role, but I've left it in a position where the employee numbers are phenomenal. The contractors we're using are great. The future looks really bright. My, message out of that is anything is possible if you're willing to put in the effort. I think the plan will be around for another 50 years, for another whole wave or whole generations of people to be able to set up their families and their lives if we continue to really value that opportunity and value that asset and value the people in it. So don't lose hope, don't lose sight. Even when the steel cycle turns, which it always does, our people are there to make sure that we're still there in another 50 years. And I've lived that. I've lived that whole cycle, and that's been a privilege to live through that. And it's wonderful that it's there today and we can be celebrating the happy 50th, amazing.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, Laura, and for giving this comprehensive view of the history of Western Port and a lot of the changes and challenges along the way.
Thanks, Martin. I appreciate it.
In our second conversation, you'll meet Regina Neville, who illustrates the value of transferring knowledge and skills between different teams and organisations.
Yes, so my name is Regina Neville. I'm the Principal Process Engineer at CPL, or at the paint lines at Western Port. And I manage a group of 3 engineers who look at process improvement, process optimization, and general root cause investigation.
Now, you mentioned paint lines. Can you tell listeners about the significance of this area or what goes on these lines?
Sure. So the paint lines at Western Port, we obviously manufacture ColourBond steel. That's our bread and butter product that we produce. So we get raw coil, or coated coil, I should say, from the metal coating lines upstream. We do also get uncoated product that we paint. So that involves the product coming in, the product getting cleaned, it's passivated, it's then primed with a primer layer, and then quenched, a top coat put on it, the paint's cured, and then it heads off to the packaging side of the line. On one particular line, we do have a laminating process where we add, or we can apply, a protective film onto the strip. But if essentially the product is then packed to customer requirements, it's tested beforehand and then dispatched.
Now, you didn't start in this position, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. I've had a bit of a varied journey through BlueScope over the years.
Can you tell me about how you started at BlueScope, what brought you there and what your background was?
So I started at BlueScope straight after university many years ago. I had applied for a position here. It was a graduate position that had involved me working on the floor, so working on shift. And so that's how I started. I was an operator for about 18 months, and that then developed into a technical role. So after my stint on shift, I applied for a process engineer's position, and I started on MCL5 many moons ago.
What was your motivation, really, for pursuing this graduate role from university? Did you know much about BlueScope or the Western Port site at that time?
No, not at all, actually. My motivation was actually the graduate program, which is an unusual graduate program. I was really quite interested in the hands-on approach of working on the floor and getting to know the process from grassroots. I was also very interested in working with, I guess, the people who are producing the product. I had a view, I suppose, that, engineers can come in and change things, and it's not always to the betterment of the people that have to deal with the process. And so I wanted to get a good understanding of, what was important to the operators.
Hands-on experience is a very good reason to cite. You've been at university, you want to put things into practice. What was the difference between theory and practice going from university to BlueScope? Did you experience what you had expected? Did you learn other things along the way?
It was probably unexpected in the sense that I didn't have any idea of what working in the steel industry was going to be like. Shift work wasn't necessarily on the cards for me. I hadn't planned on doing that to start with, but when I saw the ad and I learned about the position, it got me interested in it. As far as the theory of chemical engineering, which is what I've been trained to do, and then the practical aspects of running a paint line, yes, it's vastly different. One of the things that became clear is all this knowledge there's a lot of knowledge there, but use a fraction of the knowledge on the floor at work. The greater tool that I've had to develop really is the interpersonal communication skills of dealing with people, managing people, getting the most out of your people, and getting information from people.
On the topic of people, Western Port is a community in itself. There's a peninsula and people living around this BlueScope site, a very large industrial area. What did you know about the people in this area, and were you from the community itself already?
No, so I wasn't. So I didn't know a lot about the people in the area. I live in the Glen Waverley or Waverley area. So, that's close to where I went to university, and I've continued to live there because it's a good halfway point between Western Port and the city. And obviously with family commitments and everything else, that's why I live where I do. So yes, I didn't know a lot about the area, but what I'd say is, I've been with BlueScope here at Western Port off and on for about 25 years. And the community at Western Port is the reason why people stay. It's a very engaging community. People are here to do the best, I think, that they can. We have a brand that our people are passionate about, and I think that's really important.
Tell me about some of the relationships that maybe you've forged in this community.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, I started initially on the floor, and I did start at the paint lines at Western Port. I then moved to the metal coating lines, where I was a process engineer for a number of years, for about 3 or 4 years it was. I actually then left Western Port and left BlueScope. So I left the company. I went and worked overseas for about 4.5 years. And I came back in 2008. It was a uncanny experience in just actually coming back as well. So I came back into the country in 2008, and I got a phone call from one of my old colleagues, Scott Bond, who happened to, I think, find out that I was in the country and they were needing some support as far as technical support. And so that's how I got my job back here at Western Port and started on MCL5 again after 5 years or so of leaving.
It's certainly good to maintain those connections then. That's good evidence of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a bit of a different journey. MCL5 then was mothballed a couple of years later. So I had to apply for another position, and that's what brought me to the paint lines. In 2011 it was. And so I've come back to the paint lines. I've been here for a number of years. And so, there's a number of people that were on shift that are still around, not a lot, but it's a good experience to be able to come back and actually then work for this team in a different capacity. So coming from the floor and working with the operators, then coming into a support role and being able to, improve aspects of the process has been an interesting experience. Lots of relationships that, I've had in the past that I've built have come in very handy in being able to come in and just get on with work.
Yeah, working transitions can be very interesting. You learn a lot moving from one place to another. I got that hint from you going from university to BlueScope. Things were unexpected or you adapted and learnt new skills. When you left BlueScope to go overseas for those several years and then you came back, can you recall any interesting skills that you picked up in moving or things that you brought back to BlueScope? What are some notable differences or things that developed?
So one notable difference, I'd say, even working overseas, I was working in a very small company. It was a startup biotech company. And when I started at the company, we were all of about 15 people. 4 years later, when I left the company, it had grown a fair bit to about 60 people. So, there was quite a change. What was pretty clear when I first started with that organization, being a very small organization and having come from the BHP BlueScope organization, which is very, obviously very large, very structured, very process orientated. The one thing I soon came to appreciate is actually process. So, be it operating processes, management processes, the need for that, the need for structure, the need for consistency, and the value process offers to maintain consistency of performance, of operating through businesses. So that was an interesting, I suppose, an appreciation for the processes and structure that we had. And as I've come back to BlueScope, having been in that very small organization, it's really given me an appreciation of why we should continue having those processes and why it's important to have those processes. And what I have found coming back to BlueScope is, obviously the organization has changed and has evolved. We're trying to be a lot more agile and dynamic in how we do things. And with that can sometimes come cutting corners or maybe not appreciating why some of the processes are important. So that's one thing for me that I've been very passionate about when I've come back. Yeah, the importance of rigor and the adherence to process. It keeps us, especially in a high risk environment that we're in, it keeps us safe. But even from a product assurance perspective, it keeps us on top of our quality commitments and requirements.
That balancing act that you refer to about being agile but also very consistent and process-driven, that makes a lot of sense given what you said at the beginning of our conversation about quality control or ensuring that the materials that we put out are adequately protected or coated. Makes perfect sense. Talking about safety as a value, consistency, these are great company values or goals to strive towards. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of your own personal values at work or things that you try to espouse in your daily tasks or conversations with other people?
So the one thing that is very important to me is consistency of how we treat our people, how we manage our people. There's always been, in the background, I'd say a bit of a divide, right, between our shift teams and our support teams. Having come to the organization at that shift level, I feel very, I suppose, passionate about maintaining those relationships and the importance of those relationships and the importance of the different teams are actually feeling equal, I'd say, in a way. I think that's really important because we all bring a skill and a benefit to the organization, be it a shift worker, be it an operator, or be it, an engineer or a support person. So I think for me, one of the, I suppose, values I have is to maintain that equality of value, if that makes sense, between all the levels that we've got within the organization. And I do that for myself personally by keeping open conversation, but also keeping consistent in what I say to the people on the floor or to my own team, and making sure that the message is clear and the motivation behind why we're doing things is clear and transparent.
Equality is a great point, and it's a nice segue to thinking about diversity and inclusion, which naturally is important at every organisation, but thinking of this regional site, Western Port, which has a very dedicated or local community around it, being someone who came from the outside, we'll put it that way, how do you think about your role at Western Port? How do you consider the importance of diversity and inclusion every day?
I think it's paramount to the success and to the future, if I'm honest, of any organisation. I think in particular organizations such as BlueScope, which are very long-standing organizations, we don't, historically have had a very long-standing workforce. So there's not a lot of transient or movement of people historically. I think that is changing, obviously, as the generations go by. The current generations tend to move a lot more. I think it's important that, we have, as much as possible, a representation of our community within the organization. It brings with it, like you mentioned, I've come from outside. I've come from a different part of Melbourne even, but I've also come from a mobile sort of a journey, I'd say. So I've, lived in a few different countries over the years, and I see the value it has given me in being able to have lived in different communities across the world. And what it brings really is, an openness to different perspectives. Right? Because once you're exposed to different thinking, and people from different backgrounds will bring different thinking and when I say different backgrounds, it's a variety of backgrounds. It could be people who are from different cultures. It could be different localities. And obviously gender is the other side of things. It definitely brings a different view and a different perspective on things that you wouldn't otherwise have if you have people that are all from the same community and from the same way of thinking. So ultimately, it's the diversity of thought that it brings.
Given that this year is the 50th anniversary of Western Port and change goes on, how do you think about this great milestone in the site's history, and where would you like to see the site go in the future?
50 years is a long time. It is a great history, and it's incredible that we're still such a successful business, 50 years on. Where I've seen it, I suppose, just to give you an idea, when I first started at BlueScope, at BHP at that point, on the floor, I was one of 3 women on shift. And that was just my crew. So it was, C crew on CPL4. I was one of 3 women. And there was, similarly in different shifts and different teams, there were sprinkling of women around for sure. From a diversity perspective, there's always been, through our history, women in the organization and a number of women. The paint lines in particular has had a good representation of women in our workforce. And in recent years, I think that's dwindled. And so, we've got to look into, why that is the case. Why do we not retain women? What we've done recently in trying to increase our female representation at the floor level is fantastic. But we should recognize that we have always had women, and where we've got to now is not too different to where we have been in the past. So I think the challenge for us is to stop and think about, where to next. We have been on this journey, and it comes in cycles, as the business does. The workforce comes in cycles as well, and has definitely seen women in the workforce in the past. So this is not new, but we do need to break past that and come up to new challenges. And where I'd like to see some of that is actually in our leadership positions in the organization, to see greater representation of women through leadership positions. I would like to see, us maintaining our female leaders within the business and not losing them over a short period of time.
That's a very clear and powerful message, I think. Seeing representation through all levels, equality and diversity, as you were talking about. Bringing this conversation to a close, is there anything that I haven't asked you about your time at Western Port or your thoughts on the site that you'd like to share with listeners?
I think we've covered quite a range of topics there, and I think we've covered some of the aspects about Western Port that I do feel passionate about. I see Western Port as a family, and that's where it has been. I'd like to see that continue. And for that to continue, we need to be clear that we've all got a part to play in the success of this business. No one is any more important than the other in my mind. We all have a critical part to play in the success of this business.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your personal experience and background with us, Regina. It's been great to have you on Voices of BlueScope.
Thank you, Martin.
Our third participant is Emily Trott, who describes her experience as a pioneering tradeswoman in the state of Victoria and explains the benefits of undertaking an apprenticeship.
My name's Emily Trott. I work at BlueScope Steel in Hastings in the Western Port plant. My current role is condition monitoring specialist. So I have an electrical background as an electrical trade, and when I finished my time as an apprentice, I got into the condition monitoring field, which is around analysing machines' vibration signatures, thermography. So I do a lot of thermal imaging, oil analysis, and just overall DC motor maintenance conditioning.
Sounds like you have to keep track of a lot of things. What's the importance of vibrations in steel making or a manufacturing plant like Western Port?
It's more centred around the machine, individual pieces of equipment, their vibration signatures. So every piece of equipment will have multiple parts to it. So there'll be a pump, there'll be a motor, there'll be pipe work hanging off that. So basically, as the machine's running, all the bits that are attached to it vibrate at a certain frequency. So there's the internal bearings of the motor and the pump. There's the actual impeller in the pump that'll have its own frequency. And what happens is, as the equipment ages, the frequencies will start to change, or you might get bearing defects and things will start producing a certain frequency. So when we do our measurements, we have a look at the spectrum of that frequency and try and predict early signs of failure. Being the age of plant that we have a lot of equipment that's aging, a lot of old equipment, and just being able to keep a little extra eye on it with this vibration analysis gives us time to react and maybe save some of the equipment before it fails.
What are some things you can tell me about maintaining older things while introducing new things?
So I guess with maintaining old things, there needs to be sometimes a certain level of experience. So you need, like, the more senior tradespeople here will have a good understanding of the older equipment, because as you come through your apprenticeship from a trades point of view, you get shown the newest and latest, greatest kind of equipment. So, you know, a lot of from an electrician point of view, they'll get trained on the latest PLC software, which is like your programmable logic controller kind of software that does all the automation side of things for equipment. But when you get here, a lot of our PLC software is from 1980s. So it's not as whiz-bang fancy as the new stuff. So it's around learning that old software, and it's attached to, you know, old equipment that needs more maintenance as it ages and more specific maintenance. So we've got a lot of large machinery here, and not just anyone can come in and work on it. You need a level of experience there. So you've got that kind of old equipment, but then you've also got capital projects that happen around the plant every year, where they'll upgrade a computer system or they'll upgrade the controlling drive of a motor, that type of thing. So then you've always got to be adaptable and learn the new system as well.
The things that you've mentioned are really, really specific and interesting, but you also have to have a very broad knowledge. which is fascinating. I'd like to hear your personal story of how you came to Western Port. You mentioned that you have an electrical trade. Tell me how you ended up at Western Port and came into the role that you have today.
So I started at Western Port 20 years ago, so in 2002, as an electrical apprentice. I had previously started a electrical apprenticeship outside of here as a domestic sparky. At the time, this was back in early 2000s, 2001, there wasn't many female electricians around at all. I think at the time there was maybe 6 in the state, and I happened to be working with one of them. I was working with her for about 8 months and the work started to kind of dry up. I started looking for another apprenticeship to swap into, and BlueScope were employing. So, yeah, I ended up getting my time over to the company. Yeah, that was in 2002. So back then at BlueScope, you spent 12 months in a training centre and you learned hand skills, like hand tool skills. You learned safe work practices. You learned how to do fault finding on motors. You learned how to do board jobs, all that kind of thing. And then what happened is when you left the training centre, you swapped around each department for 3 months at a time. So you got to know the plant, and you also got to know all the electrical or all the tradespeople at the same time. So it was a really great and fun time. It's an awesome opportunity to be an apprentice with BlueScope because you just get so many different experiences. When I came out of my time, there was a job role for a condition monitoring technician. And now when I applied for the job, I had no idea what a condition monitoring technician did. They asked me in the interview, do you know what this job entails? And I basically said, you monitor the condition of equipment. But
you weren't wrong.
This is true. But because my enthusiasm and my excitement for learning something new and that I showed in the interview, they ended up giving me the position. So I did that for 5-6 years. And then we had a bit of a restructure here at work and I applied for the reliability technician role for electrical equipment and I ended up getting that role. I moved into that role and did that one for about 8 years, which I guess in the reliability role, you're basically looking after the reliability of electrical equipment, but not so much from condition monitoring side of things. So I wasn't looking directly at the vibration. I wasn't looking at the oil analysis or thermography. It was more root cause analysis of reliability issues with one unit here at Western Port. But I was able to utilise my knowledge in the condition monitoring to kind of help in the reliability world and kind of educate other reliability techs around me about the different aspects of a fault. So it's not just electrical. Sometimes an electrical problem might have a mechanical component to it. There's many different facets, I guess, of root cause analysis. So it gave me a very broad view of the piece of equipment and enabled me to work well with my mechanical counterpart on many problems. So I really, really enjoyed that part of my job. In 2019, I got the opportunity to be the maintenance strategist for the department, which gave me an opportunity to do or manage the maintenance budget for the whole department. So that was 3 separate units. And I had the challenge of the maintenance strategy. So building, not so much building it because most of it's built by then, but reviewing it, making sure we're doing the right maintenance at the right interval to prevent failures. My whole history here at the site has been in the maintenance field around predicting failures, preventing failures, and doing root cause analysis investigations. So it's all very, very interesting. My friends call me a fancy electrician.
Fancy? Well, that's not too bad. Now, you do a lot, and maintenance is one of those things I assume that needs to happen but maybe isn't always appreciated. It just has to be ticking along. It, like you said, you need to be reliable. You need the machines to be reliable. When you go to work each day, what is it about your job that keeps you going and motivated? What do you love about your work?
I love the people that work here. You always feel supported and in a team environment. So that gets you motivated to come here every day. You have a real appreciation for the site and what it's trying to produce in the product, going through the different areas of the plant and getting out the door. And I guess it always makes me feel proud to work here, to know that you've played a part in getting ColourBond on someone's roof or TrueCore frame on their house, that type of thing. So it gives you, I guess, a sense of satisfaction that what you do every day here is actually helping the company keep its good name, and you're supporting a greater good, if you know what I mean. Maintaining reputation, keeping that quality stamp. But aside from, that side of things, the actual job itself is really interesting. There's no better feeling than doing some root cause analysis on a problem or a piece of equipment and finding out what's wrong with it, putting a fix in place, and then that machine is operating a lot better because of it. It just gives you, I guess, very good job satisfaction.
So as far as I'm aware, you've also been recognised for your work by NAWO, which is the National Association for Women in Operations. I think that's correct. What can you tell us about your being highlighted by that organisation? What was the story there?
So the story there was, I've been to several NAWO events and met some of the people that run the different seminars, and they were interested in my story in that I'm a female tradesperson working in a steel manufacturing company, and that I'd been here for so long. I'd had longevity with the company and had many different roles, and I seemed to really enjoy it. And considering when I started my apprenticeship in, early 2000s, and it wasn't that popular then for girls to do a trade, they just wanted to get my story out there so that females would see the story and think, oh, I can do that too. And it was also used, I believe, for highlighting to maybe students in high school that they could do a trade role, that they could get into an apprenticeship. And I guess here on site in the past 3 or 4 years, we've hired 3 female electrical apprentices. So we've got 3 at the moment, which is just amazing, because up until recently, I was the only one here that had done an apprenticeship. Oh, we do have another female electrician here on site, but she came in externally. So, yeah, that's just what I guess the article was all about, was highlighting women in trades and in the manufacturing industry.
Now, when you were entering your trade and then started to pursue your career with BlueScope in Western Port, did you have many female role models like what you are today for others?
No, I didn't actually. And when I pursued the electrical trade was because I wanted to do electrical engineering at university, and I didn't get into university when I left high school. And one of the ways when I was researching how to get into uni was to do an electrical apprenticeship. So I thought, I better get me one of those. And that's how I started with my first apprenticeship. And I did like a week trial, really enjoyed it and pursued it. I guess, there was no real clear role models. I just knew that it was something that I wanted to do and I could do. And I guess there was a slight wanting to prove it to myself and my family that I could do a trade, because I was always very hands-on from when I was a little kid. I was always playing with electronics and trying to pull things apart, and I was responsible for blowing up one of my dad's multimeters because I had it on the wrong setting, which I know now, but when I was a 10-year-old I didn't, and I put it in the PowerPoint trying to measure the voltage, and it didn't like that.
And now you know.
And now I know. So I learned. And I was always tinkering with things and wanting to pull things apart to know how they worked. So I guess it was kind of an odd thing for a girl to do in the 90s. I just wanted to prove that females could do a trade too. You know, it was kind of at that time where things like that were becoming becoming more aware that girls could do trades.
So what's it like for you now when you consider that you're a role model for other women?
I think it's awesome. I have all the time in the world for any apprentice here on site. Like if they want to know something, you know, I will give them all the time to go through it with them, explain it to them. And I get like a little warm glow when I get to nurture the female apprentices here, because I just see so much of me in them. It's great that they've had that kind of confidence to get the job here and have success with the apprenticeship. Yes, you can be a female electrician, but there's a lot more roles on site, a lot more opportunities, and they can basically, you know, move around to whatever suits them as they move through their time here.
Now, it's the 50th anniversary of Western Port this year. If people are thinking about joining a site like Western Port, regardless of their gender or identity, what would you say to them about Western Port as a place to work and what it means to you?
Western Port is a real team environment. So it doesn't matter what department you go into. There's a crew, there's a shift team, there's a day work trade team that you'll join, and everyone is keen to share their knowledge with you, train you. There's a real sense of family here. And usually when you join here, even if you think, oh, it's only going to be a couple of years, most people end up staying 10, 15, 20 years. There's a lot of people that are retiring now and it's been their career since they left high school. You can't get that with every company these days. You know, the longevity here and just the different opportunities that you get to take is worth it. It's a really great place to work.
That's a fantastic endorsement. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about in your story or thoughts on Western Port that you'd like to share with listeners in this recording?
Yeah, I guess I just encourage anyone who's looking for a job in manufacturing or operations. There's so many different roles here. You could be a trade, you could be part of the transport team. There's just so many different opportunities here, and just don't let your gender or get in the way of that. It has been really good to see in the past couple of years the drive to hire more females. And I do a lot of the job interviews for the operator roles. And it is just awesome to chat to and do the interviews of these amazing women that are teachers or nurses, and they've always wanted to do a practical job because they like hands-on. And it's been great to see that they've been encouraged to apply and work here. And it's nice to walk around the different areas and go, hey, I interviewed her and she's now working here. You know, the same goes for male operators as well. There's plenty of those that I've interviewed and are walking around working here, but it just feels extra special when it's women in operations.
Well, I think that's a great point to bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much for your time, Emily, and for your responses and sharing your story. It's been great to have you on Voices of BlueScope.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
In the next interview, you'll hear from Uthpala Garusinghe. She asserts the importance of clear communication at work, from collaborating with colleagues in other disciplines to conveying complex research.
So my name is Uthpala Garusinghe. I joined BlueScope about 2.5 years ago as a process specialist looking after the services area in coal reduction. It's like a process engineer role. We look after the process side of the business. So coal reduction has a pickle line, a 5-stem mill, and a services area, which includes water treatment plant, boilers, and cooling towers. So what we do is we analyze trends, we look after the process, we look after the product being in the line, checking the process, making sure that everything is running to spec.
It sounds like you have to be very thorough in your work, and process is in your title as well. So generally, do you have a love of process? How do you think about that day to day in your life and your work?
It's exciting because this is what I wanted to do. So being a process engineer means you get to work on continuous improvement projects. You get to walk in the line, find areas, opportunities for improvement, and put a business case together and then actually work on it. And then when you finally do and achieve something, you can just see that live in action.
You've been here for 2.5 years, correct?
Correct.
Tell me the story of how you came to work at BlueScope in Western Port.
I'll go to the beginning. So I graduated in 2013 as a chemical engineer from Monash University. And then I did a PhD in chemical engineering as well. So upon finishing, I worked in a paper industry and I got that job by default. So BlueScope really is the job that I actually, a job that I applied and I got. So meaning that I actually wanted to get this job. So my first job was by default given. BlueScope is something that I looked for. I applied and I wanted it and I got it. So coming into BlueScope, it was a bit scary because I knew it was a manufacturing company and it's a male-dominated industry. So I wasn't really sure if I was how I'm going to feel or if I was ready for it. But like coming here, it's been wonderful. Everybody was so lovely and there's no male or female differences or anything like that. Everyone was welcoming.
Can you tell me about the first day that you joined? Do you remember that well?
I was picked up by my manager from the car park, and then his name was Chris Gracias. Chris took me to call reduction and introduced me to everybody. It was a bit overwhelming. And I had to do inductions pretty much the whole day because we take safety very seriously. So there's lots and lots of inductions and trainings that you have to go through just to make sure that you're doing the right thing, you're working on the right path, and you're weighing the science, etc. Yeah, the first day was pretty hectic. It was lots of inductions and a lot of overwhelming experience.
When you joined, what was the actual impression that you had when you were starting at BlueScope? You said you saw it as male-dominated. What kind of people were you meeting when you came into the organisation?
In BlueScope, the average age of a person is around, I believe, around 30 to 40 years. So when I joined, I was still in my 20s. So the operators and the senior process operators that I had to deal with on a daily basis were much older and also had a lot of experience. I wasn't sure what to expect when I came into work on the first day. But I just soon I realized that it is about building a relationship, going there and speaking to them, asking how their family is, and getting into that casual conversation. And after that, it didn't matter whether they were 20 years older than me, or whether they had 40 years of experience, or whether they were male or female. It didn't matter. The gender wasn't a problem at all.
And a key word that I've heard you say a few times now is experience, and there is differing experience among people in any organisation. You mentioned earlier that you also did a PhD through your study and research at Monash. That's a kind of experience that you're bringing. What can you tell me about that research experience that you had? Tell me about your PhD.
Oh, this is going a few years back. So my PhD was on bringing the paper industry from where it is to the next stage, which is like micron to a nanotechnology side. The key the experience that I bring from that is I have the eye for detail. So I can look at a trend and easily identify if it is in spec or if it is going out of spec, which is crucial for part of being a process specialist because you are analyzing trends daily. You are trying to identify if your process is going to be in spec or process is going to be out of spec. So yeah, the experience I got was just figuring out what are the gaps and working on closing those gaps, which is exactly what I'm doing here as well.
And when you're doing something like a PhD on a specific topic, it can sometimes be hard to communicate what you're doing to other people who aren't as buried in that topic as you are. When you're doing your work day to day, having that eye for detail, looking at these processes, are there any challenges in communicating your findings or those trends to other people? Tell me about the communication that you have to undertake each day.
Yeah, so sometimes it's difficult to translate the technical discussion to everybody because we've got people with various experience. Some are more managing experience than technical, and some are more technical. So it's not that I'm struggling with that. What I've learned is if I wanted to explain anything technical, I just go to the drawing board. I draw pictures and I use lots of visual aids to try and convey the message in the simplest way possible rather than going too technical. There's no point going technical to a group of people whom you're trying to convey the message, because all that is needed is for you to convey the message in a way that they understand. So what I always do is going back to the whiteboard, drawing, or sometimes using simple analogies to try and show the relationship with what I'm trying to say.
And that's catering to many different people with a diverse set of backgrounds and ideas, isn't it? You're adapting your message in different modes for different groups.
Exactly. It's mainly for the operators who are running the plant on day-to-day basis, because any improvement that you're trying to do, it needs to be communicated in the language that everybody understands, so that we achieve what we want to achieve.
And of course, learning goes two ways. So since joining Western Port, having that initial impression, getting used to the scale of everything, what are some things that you've learnt at Western Port from people who have different backgrounds or skills from you?
Well, I guess one thing I learned is communication over here is very important, and communication gets you a long way. Like, for example, if I wanted to, so we have SOP, standard operating procedures in place. And if I wanted to update a standard operating procedure and put it out there without consulting any of the operators, then that becomes a problem. But if I consult them and then put the SOP out there, I don't change anything in the SOP. It's just the mere fact that I consulted them first. I don't get any objections. So the communication part is something that I learned over here. Like, everybody valued communication and everybody wants to be heard. Yeah, that's something I learned here.
I like that as something that you've picked out about the culture at Western Port or other people there. Are there other ways that you would describe or define the culture in your workplace?
I was amazed by how much goes into, for example, like doing an isolation or a job pack, because I think the company has evolved a lot from the previous, incidents that have happened. Company has evolved a lot in the paperwork side, making sure that there's adequate amount of paperwork before someone goes into a area where their isolation is needed. So I think BlueScope invest a lot of time getting that paperwork right compared to other companies, only because BlueScope cares about safety of the people. And there's like multiple protection barriers before someone does a job to make sure that no one gets injured, that you go home the same way you come in.
That's very important. And turning more particularly back to you, you've spoken about some of the skills that you've gained, the people you've worked with. When you look at your future career-wise, working at BlueScope, what are some things that you would still like to learn or things that you would like to experience?
The BlueScope is a massive company. You are pretty much limited by your own imagination. Sky is the limit for you if you want to put yourself out there. So that's what I have learned. And for me, I want to, down the track, getting into a leadership role and eventually to become operations manager in a department. So I started as a process specialist. I have a long way to go, but that is where I want to head. And then BlueScope has numerous tools for you to achieve that. Like, for example, there are trainings such as Leaders Essentials, KT training, Lean training, and BlueScope provides you with that training, so it better prepares you for the future.
Leadership is a great concept to bring up on this podcast, because we've already had some interviews in an earlier episode with leaders of Western Port.
Yeah.
And in those discussions, you can see there isn't really a point when you become a leader. You might enter a leadership position formally, but leadership kind of grows on you. It moves slowly. Can you think of any challenging moments in your life where you've had to show some leadership or do something differently or stand for something?
Yeah, I mean, being part of a process specialist means you are the owners of your department or the line that you're looking after. So Sometimes I have to make decisions, like, for example, measuring something, like, inspect every coil. And it is not something obviously the guys want to hear because it is manual labor. You have to go out there, inspect every coil, but that is quality critical. And that is what we need to do to make sure that we are producing quality product and we are not sending any product with defect to the customer. So I've had numerous occasions where I have to request the operators to do that, and operators have refused to do that. But it's just about how you explain to them the reason that I'm asking you to do this is because it is quality critical and it is important to our customers. Just having that conversation and making sure that they understand why they have to do it.
And coming full circle to what we discussed a little bit earlier, that comes down to communication, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Now, this is 50 years of Western Port.
Mm-hmm.
You've been here for a relatively shorter time, naturally, than some of our other participants in these podcast episodes. But when you think of a milestone like that, what do you think of a time frame like this? Where do you see yourself in the history of Western Port?
50 years is a very long time. I haven't even lived that long. It's amazing, like to hear that I'm part of a company who has a history of that long. Any line, whether it's the water treatment, whether it's a pickle line or any production line, it was very different 20 years ago. And then sometimes we go through problems and we was like, oh, why is it like this? And then there'll be somebody who has been here for 30 years to say, oh, that's because 20 years ago we did this change and this is because of that. So yeah, you hear stories like that every day. And some of those stories are very fascinating because the BlueScope 20 years ago was very different to the BlueScope now. And we've evolved with time, for better, of course, but still having those people who've been here for 30, 40 years telling those stories every day is pretty amazing.
And you don't want to lose that knowledge, do you?
No, we don't want to lose that knowledge. And I think we are at a time where a lot of those senior people are about to retire, and then we are in the process of trying and capture as much information from them as possible before they walk out the door.
It's a very good strategy. You don't want to lose it. As we come to the end of this conversation, is there anything that I haven't asked you about your experience personally at BlueScope, things about the anniversary that you would like to share with listeners?
I know families can come here and have a look at the inside of the Western Port. And I myself have booked some ticket to bring my family over here because that's something I'm proud of and I want to share that with my family. It's just, I believe the tickets are available external. So if you get an opportunity to come down here, have a look at how the coils are made and where Colorbond first starts.
That's a great little advertisement you've thrown in there. I love it. Is your family living nearby or in the region?
It's about south. We live in Nareva in south, so it's about 30-minute drive, not that far. Yeah.
No problem, but still not going into an industrial site every day, so that would be a treat.
No, I mean, we have Colorbond fences at home. We got Colorbond roofs, so it would be amazing to show my family where all of that first comes from.
Perfect. Well, I hope they enjoy it. And with that, Uthpala, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining this episode of Voices of BlueScope and for sharing your story and thoughts on Western Port.
That's all right. Not a problem at all.
In our last conversation, we're featuring Stacey Forecast, who shares what it's like to work in operations at Western Port and how it felt to join with a completely different professional background.
So my name is Stacey. I work at BlueScope in Western Port. I started off there on the pack line, and I'm currently a process operator on MCL4.
For people who are listening and aren't in the steel manufacturing industry, can you define the pack line and then what the MCL is?
So I've actually done a couple of moves, but I started off on the pack line, so we'll start there. And the pack line is basically a series of 7 stations that goes from number 1 to number 7. Number 1 being where the coils get dropped, and then they go through the series of stations right up to number 7, which is a bender, and they get the correct protective outer layers, inner layers, and certain plastic wraps put on them depending on what level of protection they need as opposed to where they're going or where they're being shipped. So we have export and some domestic packers export that have a steel outer layer for a bit more protection if they're going over to, say, California or something like that. And then we've got some that just go to Braeside and they just sort of get some steel caps put over the ends and a plastic wrap on the outside just to protect them to go over to there. In terms of moves, I have done two. So I've done MCL4 and MCL5. So MCL is metal coating lines. 5 line I did for a 9-month period, and that was purely just because they walked around and said, is there anyone who wants to put their hand up? As they were doing that, I also had a few people say to me, just quietly, they want you to put your hand up. So see how you go. But I did anyway, because I thought, well, it's an opportunity to work through the majority of the lines, see how everything works, gives you a bit more of an understanding. So 5 line is a metal coating line, basically where from start to finish, your coils get put on, they get re-rolled through, coated, squashed, stretched, come out sort of different sizes, different thicknesses, and different end products, really. So metal 5 line is more true core focused. So they do H1s and paint coils. And then I'm currently learning on 4 line, which is making products that goes to our paint line within Western Port.
So is it fair to say that you've accumulated quite a bit of experience across different sections of the operations at Western Port, and you have a pretty good idea of where all this stuff is going?
Yes, it would be fair to say. But mostly because I wanted to. So if you're quite happy to just sit on the line that you start on, they're quite happy for you to do that. And you come in, you do your job, happily ever after, that's fine. I got my own training forms, and I sort of really pushed to get my training done, to get myself signed off and to get some other opportunities. Because I'd come from an outside world where I had absolutely no idea even what a steel coil was made up of before I started here. So it just made a bit more sense to me to try and get more of an understanding of what I was actually doing, rather than just coming to work and sort of doing it and going home with no idea of what's happening outside of the field that I'm in.
Where does this motivation to learn so much really come from? And where did you come from when you were entering the steel industry?
I've always been quite an inquisitive worker. So whatever job I'm in, I haven't been the sort of person who just wants to sit where I've started. I've always tried to work my way up. So I actually came from a retail background where I did a lot of retail management. I then sort of tried to push, and I ended up doing recruitment and training for a couple of different retail companies. Then I tried to do something a little bit different, and I went over to a paint company and I learned how to match the colours of your car paint. So I went to a paint company where they do that by eye. So I learned how to do that, just as something a little bit different, a bit more challenging, learning all your primary colours and all of that sort of stuff. And then, I just, I've got a lot of family members who have also worked for BlueScope throughout the years, and they've always said to me, it's a really good place to work. It's a good place to get a long-term career. So if you can get in, try and get in. So I tried a couple of times before I got in. And then, I think my 3rd time I got in.
So you're very persistent as well.
I am.
Now, family working at BlueScope, were they in operations as well, or did they work in other areas?
No, so my dad worked there probably 30 years ago, and he actually started on pack line as well. And then he was in hot strip mill, and he was the storeman for a while. I've got another uncle who's over in HR somewhere, but I'm not exactly sure where. And I had another uncle who used to be in the trades team.
It's a running theme that it's a really family-friendly employer.
It is.
When you were growing up, visiting relatives who had worked or are working at BlueScope, what kinds of story would you hear from them about working there? Do you have any memories of the impression that you had?
Well, I grew up with my dad being a shift worker. So I am pretty much living the same life that he was when I was growing up now. So there was a lot of stories of doing a double shift, or, I'm on my night shift this week. And there was a lot of us waiting for days off with him so we could go and do activities and stuff like that. I've heard about a lot of the people that he worked with throughout his career there. And it is really interesting because, as I started, some of them have come up to me and been like, oh my God, hi, I think I know your dad, and stuff like that. So it is interesting that it's always remained a little bit of a community where even if they just know someone's got the same last name as you, people will make an effort to come up and say hello and introduce themselves.
So that's a lasting memory for you. And although you didn't enter operations straight away, you took a different path through other areas or industries. You've ended up here in operations. What does that feel like, doing the same sort of shift pattern or work that your dad was doing?
It's safe to say he's pretty chuffed. He really enjoyed his time there, and he's always said, try and get in because you'll be able to really set yourself up in life with a job that you can have forever. and he's like, and you'll be treated well, you'll be paid well, the work is good, you've got all round a good thing. So it's a really nice feeling to know that you've got a job that you actually enjoy, that you come to work every day, you work with a team that you enjoy spending time with, because you spend 12 hours with them every shift. That's a lot of time to spend with someone. So it's really nice to know that, everyone's on the same page and you actually have a job that you really enjoy and that you come into every day.
You've really emphasised in each of the answers you've given so far that importance of working with people. Skills are part of that as well. What sort of skills have you learnt or gained since joining this industry, and how has it felt different in that working environment from previous ones?
It's just a lot of hands-on skill that you learn. And obviously, since I've started, I've got my crane license, my forklift license. I've done an assessor's course. I've done the lean manufacturing course. So there is a lot of different things that you can do, and outside learning and stuff that is also on top of that, where you can gain further skills. And then you learn the basic skills of your line. So there's a lot of things to learn for each line as well, a lot of different skills that you learn to work every station, to operate every position, and all of that sort of stuff. But there is a lot of training, a lot of people there to back that up. And it is nice to go from retail, which is very much people-based and customer-based, to, there's a lot of people-based stuff there too, because you work with such a big team, but it's a lot of hands-on multitasking and being able to think quickly and make sure everything's done properly.
Now, it's hard to generalise about women or any group in general, but what do you think you've brought in terms of skills or difference to BlueScope as a woman with a different working background?
I think it just brings a nice balance and a different outlook to some things in a team. I think and I don't want to generalise, but when you have a whole workplace that is a majority of men, sometimes it can be a lot of, no, I'll do that because I'm better at that or whatever. And I've found that a lot of the women are coming in and some of the guys are like, wow, you're really good at that. And they're really supportive as well. A lot of them will take you on and really try to promote you through and push you into more training. So I think it opens up a bit more of a balance, makes people a little bit more open-minded and willing to see other opinions and things from a different point of view. So I think I do think it really just does bring a nice sense of balance to a workplace that makes everything sort of gel a lot more.
Can you think of a particular instance where you were surprised by someone in your team or something unexpected that you learned?
I think it's been surprising for me just because the amount of stuff that I've learned so far. It is a whole world of opportunity of stuff that you can learn and stuff that is available to you. I was quite surprised when you came in that you do a double Cert 4, and that's just, part of your learning there. And even so, when a lot of the supervisors are like, oh, let's go make sure that you're inducted in this and all of your safety stuff that you're made to do as well, it's all very much not really just done, but also appreciated. So I've found that being the person that said, yeah, okay, I'll go over to 5-line for 9 months and I'll learn that. And yeah, absolutely, I'll jump at the opportunity on 4-line and I'll learn that. It does open a lot of doors in terms of, I've then been asked to do some information nights. I've done a training video for new recruitment and stuff like that. So I think that surprised me because you are recognised for a lot of the effort that you put in. It's really nice.
Going to information nights would be a very interesting experience because I'm assuming that you're meeting people from within the Hastings community and also people outside who might commute into the area. What's that been like, going to some of those evenings and meeting people? How much of yourself have you shared at those?
I didn't do this year's, but I did the 2 years before. So I got the ones in lockdown. Mm-hmm. So it was all over Zoom. So it was interesting because it was actually like a screen from the Brady Bunch, just squares and squares and squares of different people's faces. But it is really interesting because you've got 110 people on a screen all just looking at you. There's sort of 6 of you sitting there and asking you how you feel in your life working there and what they are actually accepting and what they're open to and how work-life balance works there and how family life works there and all of that sort of stuff. So you do have to share a lot and be open to sharing a lot.
What's the impression been from people when they've heard your answers and spoken to you? Do some people seem surprised about your role in operations as a woman, or do you feel society's changed and just sees that as the norm?
I think it's a bit of both, actually. I've felt in terms of the women in operation. The general public sort of, once I say to people where I work or what I do, people are a lot more accepting, a lot more used to it. There is quite openly in the world a bit of a push for women into those sort of jobs and that sort of stuff. So that's a lot more accepting. I think also being a woman in that job, and I've also got tattoos. I'm also quite short. So I think a lot of the time people question that a bit more, like, oh, is your workplace accepting of tattoos as well as you being female? Or, you know, and you do some of the stuff the guys can do there. And if there's something that you can't do because of whatever sort of safety reason, they will take that on board, they will take note of it, and they'll try and change it so anyone can do it.
Accessibility is a good point, not just the fact that it's men and women, but people of different heights and sizes. Are you seeing a kind of accepting accessibility in manufacturing towards people of different stature or different heights, or do you see room for improvement?
So we've got like a list of SOPs and stuff like that, which is like a standard operating procedure to tell you exactly how to do every single job in the plant, basically. And I've been asked, you know, after doing a couple, to review this and tell me if there were any parts that you found difficult or what we could change or what we could do better. So there's definitely more of an emphasis and an appreciation towards, if we can make it easier, let's make it easier.
That's great. So that's a sign of progress that you've seen. In terms of where we can go from here, what are some different improvements or things that you can see that can change in the industry to make it more accessible to everyone?
It's just reviewing some of the stuff that has been in place for a really long time. We have come really far just in terms of the people that we're hiring now and the jobs that can be done and the way that people do things. There's a lot of jobs there and there's a lot to learn. I think it is just reviewing them and making sure that each thing isn't just accessible to who used to work there now, but also accessible to the people that we're bringing on board. So I grew up in this area as well, and it's always just been a part of this community. Everybody here knows someone who used to work for us. Everyone here knows someone who, you know, at some point has either worked there or they know someone that's worked there. So it's always been a part of the community, and even more so now people are coming from further to work there. Things are changing, things are being progressed, things are being looked at, updates are happening. You know, it was part of my childhood and now it's part of my life with the open day and all the stuff that they're talking about. Like, I've got 2 foster kids that have lived with me for a year and a half, and the 16-year-old was like, oh, can I come and have a look where you work? I think it's just passing down that feeling of, like, I go to work every day, but I actually do like it here. So absolutely, you want to come and have a look at what it's like to have a job that you're quite happy to do every single day. Then, yeah.
And did you ever see yourself as a kind of industrial role model? What's that like?
I didn't at all. I mean, I was quite set in my retail management sort of background. I thought, if anything, I probably would have progressed more to HR and recruitment, but I actually really enjoy learning all the hands-on skills and all the other bits and pieces there that keep you busy and also keep your brain quite engaged and keep you challenged all the time.
That's a great summary of the site and what your career has been. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about or that we haven't said about Western Port that you would like to add to the recording?
That's it. It'll just sort of be where my journey goes from here, really. I'm only 3 years in, so.
Well, on that point, maybe as a last question, where would you like to see it go?
I have expressed that at some point in future I would like to move into more of a leadership role. Probably starting with maybe an SBO role, just a smaller team to start with, and then learn some more skills. I'd like to, just for my own benefit, I'd like to know sort of the motions from the start to finish on my line, say, before I actually manage that team. I think that's quite a benefit to have. So I think, yeah, I'd like to go into some sort of leadership role eventually, but see where it goes.
Well, look, I say all the best. It seems like you've brought so much and you've learned so much already. And with that, I just want to say thank you, Stace, for joining this recording and reflecting on the anniversary, 50 years of Western Port with us.
No worries. Thanks, Martin.
With that last interview, we have reached the end of this episode. We thank Laura, Regina, Emily, Uthpala and Stacey for their time. This also concludes our 3-part anniversary mini-series about Western Port. Whilst we've only been able to include a fraction of the workforce that has contributed to Western Port throughout its history, We show our appreciation for everyone at the site and thank all participants and BlueScope people who made these episodes possible. We hope that you've enjoyed listening to the featured stories, and make sure to keep an eye and ear out for future TV BlueScope YouTube videos and podcasts about our people. If you've enjoyed listening to Voices of BlueScope or even wish to share some feedback with us, feel free to leave a comment on the relevant updates at BlueScope on Twitter or in our BlueScope LinkedIn feed, or even leave a review for the show on services like Apple Podcasts. As always, thank you for listening to the Voices of BlueScope podcast. We hope to have you again soon.